Alright, welcome everyone to another guide video for Dominions 5, but today's video is a little bit special. So I'm going to talk about the fact that I have just hit 1,000 subscribers first, which is something I never thought would bloody happen. But here it is. The Dominions community is a really small one, and I know I've done a couple of other games, and I intend to hopefully, as I can get my upload schedule up, hopefully look at a couple of those other games, and that's one of the questions I'll ask you all today. But 1,000's a really big sort of milestone for me, and I'm really appreciative of it. So just thank you to everyone for your comments, your support, and the way you've engaged with the content over the last year or so that I've been putting it up. I've learned a lot just by the comments that have been made, and I really appreciate the engagement that's taking place. I figured I'd run through the usual questions that get asked at this point, including the ones that YouTube sends you messages asking you about at this point. So first things first, monetization, never. I'm not going to put, even if tomorrow this thing blows up and I become the biggest thing ever and I have like 150,000 subscribers or whatever the hell, Dominion somehow becomes the most popular content on the internet, no, I'm not turning the content I do into an advertisement for slot machine simulators that are described as narrative games with amazing engrossing storylines. That's just not what I want. I'm not going to market online casinos to you guys halfway through my videos, nor do I think I need to set up a Discord or anything like that. To be honest, the communities that I work in, we already have a bunch of Discord channels, we have good established communities, and I'm happy working within those communities. I enjoy my little home on Lucid and GC server, and I think that the fewer places that the Dominions community is concentrated, in some ways, the better, because it means that more people are around to engage when people communicate. I see no reason to break that up any further. And I also don't think I'm at the point where I could put up a Patreon or anything. My upload schedule is not frequent enough for me to really feel like I'm delivering value. If I feel like I can lift that upload schedule and take more requests, maybe. It would certainly help, as we're in a serious wage restraint period with COVID-19 and all that. But for the moment, I'm happy to just keep doing what I'm doing for free, for the benefit of everyone and for myself. And we'll leave it as that. I do, however, want to do something to celebrate this, so what I'll do is, there's two things I want to know. The first is, I will put up a card on this video, basically asking, while I will always be doing the content I'm doing, is there a particular category that you guys are more interested in seeing? Do you want to see more Dom 5 game, or Nations Guides and Strategy? Do you want me to see play more additional titles? There's a couple I've played before that I want to go back to as soon as updates drop for them. Or is there something entirely different, in which case, click the other button and put a comment. The other thing is, I want to do one video that is unique and special just for the 1,000 subscriber mark, because it means a lot to me. So this is where I encourage weird, wacky, zany game suggestions and ideas. Things that would cause me physical or emotional pain are not excluded. Message me on Discord or comment on this video, and I'll seriously consider doing a one-off for that. I've already had some funny ideas sent to me by people in the past, not in relation to this, so we'll see what people come up for this one. And that's enough of me talking about myself for a while. Let's talk about the topic of today's video. So I said I wanted to start looking at the nations that are in my upcoming Disciples game. And the first one I picked is Early Age Berytos. I picked Berytos because it's also a nation that people have said on past videos they would like to see me play at some point. And after having a look at it, you know what? I reckon I would. I would like to play Berytos at some point because it's got a lot going for it. It's a bit different. The first thing I do whenever I look at a nation is I look at the lore, and the second thing is I look at the existing guide. So let's look at the lore of Berytos first, then let's talk about what has been said about it, then we'll go through my thoughts and my roster, because I disagree with some of the content that's been written out there, but I disagree with it with the big caveat that I've never played the damn nation. So let's have a look at Berytos. Berytos is interesting lore-wise. Berytos is a sort of demi-Phoenician hybrid nation. So everyone is probably familiar with Theridos, which was the Telkine kingdom, where eventually the Telkines were punished by the Pantocrator of the time by having Theridos sunk into the ocean. But before it was sunk into the ocean, Theridos had a significant empire in what I imagine to be essentially the Mediterranean. If you look at the nations of Dominions mapped onto the real world map, Theridos would be in the Mediterranean. Berytos is perhaps Phoenician, Carthaginian. There are elements of various influences in there, and the idea was Berytos was a colony of Theridos. However, the Telkines obviously were sunk into the ocean, Theridos was destroyed, and the Telkine gods vanquished. Remember that you can't start a game with Theridos with a Telkine unless you take a Wake Pretender, which we're going to assume is not the case here. And there was a period of time before the Ascension Wars. So here we are. The Telkines who had taught these people shipbuilding, sailing, metal crafting to the human ancestors left a nation that was sort of bereft of spiritual leadership. And two different parties came to Berytos and sort of inserted them into Berytian society. And the first were the Melquarts of Hinnom, so the cannibalistic, evil, but extremely powerful descendants of the Grigori. They came to Berytos and inserted themselves into their culture. And the blood cult of the Melquarts and Hinnom, so the Hinnomite religion in some ways, found its way into Berytos, and in the capital colony of Berytos itself, there was this large temple to the Melquarts that were built. The other aspect was Machakan exiles, so Colossi exiles, found their way into Berytos and secured themselves as part of the ruling elite. So in Berytos you have female Colossi serving as the brides in waiting, who are powerful Colossi mages, and then you've got male Colossi Warriors, which are essentially very similar. So these are the great race of the Mababwe. The Colossi, as the Arcocephalians call them. So in the early age, these are also a major power in Machakan. You'll see Lion Warriors, who are also Colossi. These are the Colossi who came to Berytos. So you have a Therodian-inspired culture of humans, and you see that in the way that they fight, who are ruled over by a combination of Machakan Colossi, who also serve as their holy and elite warriors, and then on top of them, or alongside them, you have the Melquarts, the Hinnomite Melquarts. And this leads to an interesting hybridized nation which has a lot going for it. If you look at the comments of how Berytos is often described, when I looked at some guides, some of which were for older than Dominions 5, some of which are relatively current, the general consensus is that Berytos is a powerful late-game nation which struggles to expand and survive early. Me, I'm not so sure. I think they have what they need to survive early on, unless someone comes at them with like Mega Bless Rush Elves. But very few people can survive if Mega Bless Rush Elves come at you. And even then, Berytos has some tools for dealing with the problem. But I did do some expansion tests. I did like 6, I think, using various mechanisms. This was one I did with a light imprisoned Bless and amazing scales, using a combination of this. I think this combination was Colossi Warriors and Brittain Lancers, which was a weird one I tried, and I ended up with 20 provinces plus another 6 encircled by the end of the 12 turns, plus 2 castles up, 1 almost upgraded, and a 3rd nearing completion. So solid economics. So this would be a 20 province expansion with a 6 province fill in, and I'll show you another one later, which is even more heavy scales, where I literally used nothing but Spearmen and did a perfectly functional multiplayer expansion. But anyway, before I get into the debates, let's go through the Brittain roster. Alright, so here we are with the roster. Troop lineup first, then commanders, and then we're going to jump over to the mod inspector for summons, because Berytos is important. It's important to consider the summons. So, troop lineup. This has been described as a weakness at Berytos. Given it's the early age, I'm not so sure. Brittain militia, I don't like militia units in general. I say pass. 7 gold, they're relatively cheap, but I don't generally think the value is there. The Brittain archer is a protection 6, 10 gold, 7 resource, 9 recruitment points, so relatively cheap short bow archer. Short bows are semi-reasonable in the early age, but much more so because Berytos is a Flaming Arrows nation, or it can be a Flaming Arrows nation relatively early, and because of that, short bows are great. A short bow under Flaming Arrows is better than 2 crossbows, unless the enemy has fire resistance, or is at least comparable to 2 crossbows, because you get 2 short bow arrows and 2 essentially crossbow bolts over 2 turns, whereas a single crossbowman would shoot 1 crossbow bolt equivalent. So the Brittain Archer has a place. The Brittain Spearmen also, I would say, has a place. The good thing about these guys is that they're not amazing, okay? 9 protection is definitely not amazing. 10 attack, 13 defense, where some of that is a shield parry, is not amazing. But hear me out. Their head protection is pretty good. Their lenothorax armor is okay. It's 8 protection on the body. They have a shield, so they're not going to be eaten apart by arrows. The combination of 8 body protection and a shield means that short bows will not murder these guys. They have an okay spear, and they have javelins. They have the 2 ammunition javelins, which can also take flaming arrows. So if you put flaming arrows on these guys, all of a sudden they're throwing crossbow bolts before they go in with their spear, which is a nice trick. Not too bad. There are enemy types that is useful against, particularly if you're fighting enemies that don't have fire resistance but do have glamour, for example, who are freaking everywhere in the early age, unless everyone's taking fire and shock resist, as they might do. Then flaming arrow javelins before you close into close combat is an option. It's something that will do damage even to something like a Vanhir. Because it's armor piercing. Well, it'll do a little bit of damage to a Vanhir, but it's something. The Brittain Soldier, I don't like. The Brittain Soldier upgrades his protection a little bit by going up to a scale Melquarts and gets a higher damage short sword, which can do stabbing and do piercing and slashing, as opposed to just a smaller amount of piercing. But the penalty is you pay a few more resources and you lose the Javelin. I like the Javelin, but you know what? Some people might prefer the Brittain Soldier. The Brittain Heavy Spearman is basically a hoplite, a good hoplite. There are shit hoplites and there are good hoplites, and good hoplites have formation fighter, so you can put 4 into a square. Brittain Heavy Spearmen fit 4 to a square. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're not old, unlike Ermor's Triarii, for example. They don't do much damage, is probably one of their big problems, but they have a little more protection in that they have the scale mail hauberks that they're wearing instead. It means they have a bit of encumbrance on them, which is, annoying. But they have, 11 morale, average skills, and they pack 4 to a square, and they've got 14 prot. It's okay. It's okay. It's a decent hoplite. The Brittain Elites cost even more, and what you're paying for here is a little more skill. The difference between the Brittain Soldier at 10, 14, 9, 10, 13, 10, the Brittain Elite Soldier, 14, 19, 18. So a bit of an upgrade, but you go up to 14 prot, and you get a little extra in your attack and defense. Like personal preference, I think, at that point. The Brittain Lancer doesn't look very good, but I've actually, in playing around with them, I've actually got good results out of them. The reason you can get good results out of the Brittain Lancer, well, let's talk about the Lancer first. 10 hit points, size 3, so instantly you're going to lose on attack density. Only 9 protection, so it's the typical Brittain lenothorax and crested helmet and shield. 11 morale, 11 attack, 17 defense. But here are some things that, and 1 light lance attack, 13 piercing damage. Here are the things that, like, some redeeming features in argument for it. Firstly, it's only 20 gold, which is a pretty freaking cheap cavalry unit. You don't get a hoof attack, but you're only paying 20 gold for them. They only cost 13 resources, which makes them cheaper than some of your resource-intensive units like the Heavy Soldiers and, more importantly, the Colossi Warriors, but they are recruitment point heavy, so if you're trying to balance out your resource recruitment point spend, they can be useful. They move really, really quickly. They have 20 map mood and 26 combat speed. They have 17 defense because they're cavalry, not all of which is a shield, unlike the infantry, so that they're hard to hit, and because they've got that long lance, they can repel some attacks against certain enemy types, and on that first hit, they get the lance charge, which increases their ability to hit and how hard they hit. So on the charge and as rear backstabbers, Brittain Lancers, like, they're okay. The reason I found not to use them is because they don't fit in ships. Size 3s can't sail with most Brittain sailing capabilities, but I was able to get some use out of these guys as expansion because they're cheap enough, and I was inspired to do this by testing another couple of nations who have famously bad cavalry that's really cheap, and figuring out that cheap cavalry can occasionally be useful. Against other things, they're trash. So I would just say, when expanding as Berytos, pick your indie types, know your indie types in the early age, and send an appropriate force against it. Colossi Warriors. Colossi Warriors are they're an okay cap-only sacred. 35 gold, 25 resources, 21 recruitment points. Nice flat requirements there. Size 3, 22 hit points, 12 attack, 15 defense, 14 protection, 14 morale, and they do 20 either pierce or slash damage with a short sword, and they are bodyguards. And of course they take a bless and thus have half upkeep. The Colossi Warrior is okay. He is not incredible. I would pick a lot of other sacreds that are available in this age over him. I would, for example, pick the Vanir over the Colossi Warrior. But Vanhirs are really good, and there's a lot of other nations that have really good sacreds, but he's respectable. He's tough, he has hit points, and with a bless, or even without a bless, he can expand against most indie types, and with a little bit of a bless, he can do really well. He's got 14 map move. There's not a lot to like bitch on here. Colossi Warriors are okay. And finally, your War Elephants. Some people are really good at using elephants in expansion. I think that they're too expensive for what they do. My concern with elephants is that to make an expansion party of elephants work, you need more elephants, more gold worth of elephants, more recruitment turns worth of elephants than you need the equivalent amount of troops. Although the troops will sometimes suffer more attrition, but the elephants, if they do suffer attrition, it gets really expensive really quickly. So far as elephants go, the Brittain elephant's not too bad. It's got 11 protection for one thing, which is handy, which makes those 64 hit points last, but it's got a defense skill of 8 and it's size 6, so it's going to get surrounded, it's going to be butchered. Has a tusk as well as its trample. Look, a lot of guides recommend War Elephant expansion. I think troop expansion is entirely viable against most threats, and you're also in danger if you take elephants. If you do hit something like barbarians, you're in trouble. Like, same thing with Colossi Warriors, if I'm honest, with a lot of blesses. If you encounter something that hits really hard, you're going to really wish that you were doing, like, javelin spearmen fighting the enemy rather than sending your elephants up against barbs and having them cut down in a heartbeat. I think this is an okay troop lineup. It's not like Miquelin's recruit everywhere sacreds, or it's not the elf lineups, but you know, it's also not shit. It's okay. It's a troop lineup that does what you need a troop lineup to do in the early age, where indies are relatively weak. They make numbers, they take the magic of the nation well. I think this is a serviceable troop lineup for the time and scale that you need troops as Berytos. Let's go commanders. Brittain Scout, nothing interesting to say. Brittain Captain, 80 leadership, so you do get formations and sailings. Max size 2, however, so he can take his 80 up to 80 human units, not including Colossi, Lancers, or War Elephants, and he can sail with them, and he can put them into formation. This is handy. Javelins like being in formations as well against certain enemy types. So, Brittain Captain, functional leader. Mage Pilot, and it's worth pointing out at this point before I go through these, the recruitment restrictions. So, Berytos is meant to be a coastal nation. They are pushed to be coastal, and as a result, some of their mages are restricted. The Mage Pilot is coastal fort only. The Stormcaller is capital coastal fort only, capital coastal fort only, and the Bride in Waiting is capital only, slow to recruit. The Brittain Sage and Priest, however, are recruit anywhere, and I will talk about why this means that Berytos is not shit, even if they want to use inland fortifications. Mage Pilot is an unoffensive, Air 1, Water 1, 9 research, 80 gold mage with sailing. Okay. Like, there's reasons you might want this, but for the most part, I wouldn't waste coastal fort terms making them until you have lots of coastal forts, and even then I'd probably recruit more Stormcallers. The Brittain Sage is your research mage. The Brittain Sage is 80 gold for 11 research because he's got Adept Researcher +2. He also has sailing but only 10 leadership, and he's Earth 1 random air or water. Notably, that means they cannot random Earth 2, which would make them really useful. This is okay, but this is a research monkey, and it's enough to say that your nation gets a serviceable research monkey. That said, the Brittain Priest is probably what you're going to be recruiting from your non-coastal forts, because the Brittain Mage gets half upkeep for being sacred. So this is a sacred mage that comes as Priest 1, so it doubles your Priests, Blood 1, with a random of Fire, Air, Earth, or Blood. I think this mage is the shit, or at least this mage is useful enough as a non-coastal recruit to make Berytos a really strong nation, because you have a recruitable sacred blood hunter. You have a recruitable sacred blood hunter. So who cares if you can't recruit Stormcallers in non-coastal forts, because you want to be putting out a lot of Brittain priests because you want to run a blood economy, right? Also, the fact that they have blood means you can enter Sabbaths, which means all of a sudden you have fire, air, and earth and blood as Sabbath paths, because you can wire these guys right up into a Sabbath. And we'll see how that synergizes with the Brides in Waiting as well. So these are priests of the Melquart cult. They lead sacrifices. They can blood sacrifice, which lets Berytos pump out its, I imagine, at least in my case, if you're very good scales, quite aggressively. And get fire, air, earth, and blood into your paths while also being efficient hunters. And they can also research in a pinch. If you have too many blood hunters, 140 gold at half upkeep at 9, that's serviceable. It's not a great research mage, but you know they can make lightless lands, so you can solve that problem eventually. But they're not your primary combat mage. Your primary combat mage, at least early on, is the Stormcaller, supplemented maybe by the mage pilots. Because early game, mage pilots can do lesser aerial elementals just fine, whereas Stormcallers are more your guys when you're bringing out lightning evocations, and later in the game, full-size air elementals. Stormcallers have the problem of being old. 205 gold gets you 15 research, air 2, water 2, and then random fire, air, water, astral. Note the astral lets them go into communions, and then randoming air 3 is just powerful. Water 3 you probably don't need, but it lets you ratchet all the way up to summoning elemental royalty if you want, super easily. So if you're water 3 and you get the bracelet and the robe, you are water 5 and can make elemental royalty. Done. And a little bit of fire. There's some fun things to do with fire cross paths, but we don't need to dwell on them right now. So Stormcaller, perfectly serviceable battle mage, like combat mage, at reasonable cost. Old is a bit of a problem. They're not sacred, so you're paying full upkeep. But these are useful because you can put up Storm, you can summon Storm power, and you can throw Thunder Strikes until the day is over. You can put out air elementals. Storm power works really well with these guys. And your air 3 random is probably your best hope of getting that, or using the astral path ones in conjunction with maybe some blood priests just to boost the path. Just on one communion master to get Storm up, you've got extensive options. The other tool you have is the Bride in Waiting, and the Bride in Waiting is pretty cool. You don't see mages like this as much in later ages. This is very much a sign of the early age, strong, powerful mages. This is a 415 gold mage that is also a priest 2 and sacred, so at least you're only paying half upkeep. Fire 2, air 2, Earth 1, Blood 2, and the ability to random, so you can get Earth 2 this way at least. You will get, and possibly the very small chance at Earth 3. It's also your chance to lift your way up to Blood 3 or even Blood 4 on a native recruit. So the Bride in Waiting is it's a good slow to recruit mage. I tried to get in my testing one out searching my land relatively early on because I always had lots of money as Berytos, particularly my Berytos, using all of my strategies. So you can see I've already searched land relatively early on and started finding sites early using a Bride in Waiting that I got out relatively early. The map I was using for my test, by the way, is the map that's in our Disciples game, just because I wanted something consistent across multiple tests, and the same map tends to put Berytos in the same point every time, so you can get a similar start every time. So that's the Brittain lineup. A few things jump out at you straight away. The first is a Recruit Anywhere Blood Hunter, who is relatively efficient. That's great. A serviceable troop lineup, and they have a Communion Mage, they have a Research Monkey, and they have some functional combat mages and a functional center point mage as well. But the Stormcaller is a functional air evocation and conjuration mage for the early game. Decent access to elemental paths, limited sorcery access, so no death access, for example, but blood access, and blood is a late game strategy all of its own. Now, the analysis of what they have available to them isn't complete until we go and talk about summons, however, because Berytos is a nation of summons. So let's go talk. I'll jump into Dominions 5 Mod Inspector and we'll talk about the summons that Berytos has available to them. Alright, here we are in the Dominions 5 Mod Inspector, and we get to see some of the fun about early age Berytos and the things that make it truly deadly in the late, and even, I would say, some of these in the middle game. Let's cover the unimpressive stuff first. Pride of Lions, Nature 2, 10 gems, gets you 10 Great Lions, which are size 3 non-sacred animal chaff. Skip, Herd of Elephants, gets you 25 nature gems at Conjuration 3, gets you up to 5 plus a half per nature level of elephants, who are unarmoured 61 HP war elephants. Mind you, that still makes them protection 11, because the armour that Berytos puts on them doesn't actually do anything. 5 gems per elephant gets you 100 gold for 5 gems. I don't know, if you're going to layer a bunch of magic on them, maybe in a hurry, but 25 nature gems is pretty steep. You're getting to the point where later game you can use that to get, I mean, it's half a Mother Oak cast, it's a significant fraction of some of the Conjuration summons, but if you've got nothing else to do with your nature gems, maybe. I don't know. I generally don't like animal chaff, but 5 tramplers? Maybe. Machakan, so Maziks are these guys. And you get Machakan at Nature 1, who just about any Nature Indie, and remember, you don't have Nature access as Berytos, so all these Nature summons, you're going to rely on Indies, but Nature 1 Indies are everywhere in the early age, and to a lesser extent, all ages. Machakan are imps. They are permanent summon imps. So you get 2 and a fraction per gem, and what you get is a stealthy 15 defense skill, 9 HP, size 1, strength 9 though, Muzik, who can fly. You don't have a flying stealthy leader to lead these around, which is unfortunate. But in an emergency, break glass in case of emergency, 80 Machakan for 30 nature gems is a lot of attacks. It's a lot of harassment penalty, and if you can throw, because they are demons, if you could throw things like Bloodlust on them, suddenly they're hitting for damage, and you can repeat the usual what you would normally do to counter certain enemies by dumping a whole bunch of imps at them. You can bring permanent Maziks instead, and that just saves your mages doing the sum. You use nature gems instead of blood slaves. Nature gems are worth more, obviously, but you can bring them to the fight and not have to spend time and fatigue, most importantly mage fatigue and slaves in the field summoning those imps. They can just be there, drop Bloodlust, bunch of Machakan, done, and Conjuration 3 is early. You'll notice that there's a couple of these servers like panic buttons. Berytos has lots of panic buttons, which I think helps offset its weakness. The Lilot, I would not make the Lilot myself, but there's a case. So the Lilot is only 15 nature gems, and what you get is a Dream Seducer, which forces an enemy to roll Morale v14. I'm not going to get into all the mechanics around assassins in this video, but this gives you access to a flying Dream Seduction, which is the inferior form of seduction in my view, because you can check to avoid it in the first place, whereas something like the actual seduction on something like a Dryad I would generally prefer. They have no magic paths, so they're not going to kill you in the assassination if you got to that point the same way a Dryad would. So just in all ways, they're inferior to like Pan, but it's an option. It also gives you a niche tool for, like, if you ever want a stealthy seducer for a specific action, and they've got 22 hit points and a life drain, but I don't know. But they are cheap. If you want 1 or 2, you can get them, but you need to get up to Nature 4, and you don't have that as Berytos. So I don't think you'll see Lilots in many games. I've never seen Berytos in a game until this one, so I haven't seen any Lilots, but, who knows, maybe. Let's get into the real shit. This is all Conjuration. If you climb all the way up to Conjuration 8, you get Telkeens. Same way Theridos does. Telkeens continue to be just as badass as they are for Theridos, and Water 5 Air 2 is entirely doable for you. In some ways it's easier for you than for Theridos, because you get Water, Air, Cross Path, Native, and Water is super easy to boost. So if you do go up to Conjuration 8, you would get Telkeens. Telkeens are shape changes. They are High Path, Fire 2, Air 4, Water 4, Earth 3, Death 2, and a random in the background. Pretty cool. and they can change shape too, which dampens some of their magic paths, but gives them access to Master Smith. So they can be decent forgers. They have sailing, they have fear, they have high hit points, they have decent statistics. Unfortunately, they are reapers, so they do kill population, and they also auto cast foul vapors every combat that they're in. This is a useful big mage. It is a useful super combatant. It costs water gems, which are not usually the most useful sort ever. It costs fewer than 70 of them, and they're cute with their flappy flippers. So these are the old leaders of Berytos, and you're summoning them back from their prison where the Pantocrator put them. So handy, useful super combatants. They give you wide path access. They're also one of your only ways to get to death, right? You can get to here, Water 5, Air 2, relatively easily, get Death 2 access. That gets you to Death 3. If you have Astral, maybe you can climb to Death 4, make a hat, climb to Death 5, do some serious summoning. Like, you can break into... But at that point, you're at Conjuration 8. But does mean that if you can start bootstrapping Conjuration that late in the game, you have options because you'll already have unlocked the Death summons. It's just usually going to be a bit late. But I thought I'd note that as interesting, especially since they can random Death 3. There you go. I would instead use them as big-ass casters, very niche forgers, and occasionally they're available for super combatant duty, but you're using something else for super combatant duty because blood gems are cheaper than water gems. Let's talk blood summons. Berytos has a recruit anywhere blood hunter, so you're going to be looking at blood. Blood because it scales so well into the late game, and because Berytos will usually have the economy to support and survive blood hunting rather extensively. So I've got a couple of blood items up here. The first is the Seirem. Now, this is cast by Scapegoats, which means you get it at blood 3. This is early enough that I think this serves as a panic button. Also, Berytos has some capital blood income, so even if you don't start blood hunting immediately, you'll be able to get a few casts of this off if you need to, although you probably need to scale it a lot more. Problem, you can only cast Scapegoats and summon Shedim in wastelands. So for Berytos, like for Hinnom, capturing a wasteland is important, and it's worth going inland for because these summons are cool. They're cool in very different ways. The Seir comes earlier and is cheaper. So for Scapegoat, you get the 2 for 8, so you get 4 blood slaves per Seir. The Seirim are goat demons, begotten of Azazel, so they are sacred to the people of Berytos because of their association with the ancestry that also runs in the veins of the Melquarts, or at least that's how I understand the lore. What you get is a berserking, sacred demon with 3 inbuilt attacks. So, this thing hits hard. A Seir has these 2 claw attacks and a gore, and while none of them have damage bonuses, the Seir comes with 16 strength, and they'll take Bloodlust just like anything else, so that'll boost them by 4, which gives them a bunch of 20 damage attacks, and they'll take your Bless. If you have strength in your Bless, they're going to hit even harder. They have 28 hit points, which will keep them alive for a while, 15 magic resistance, and high morale, which means they don't break, they're relatively fast. This is a Killy Sacred, which can be easily buffed using demonic buffs, and if appropriately supported with magic or with a functional bless. So these guys could take an obscene bless and become really killy berserkers, or even with an average or moderate stats bless, they're still, to my mind, perfectly viable. Because they're blood summons and they're summoned using Pathrek 1, all of your priests, all your Brittain priests can summon these if they get to a wasteland province. You can shit out a bunch of them and get them to the front. I would compare them... Actually, give me a moment and I will compare them to one of the great sort of competitors in this age, or any age. Let's get this guy. Okay. This is the Aussie, the famous Ozelotl that comes at Blind Jaguar Fiend. So, 16 slaves for 3, so you're paying 4 slaves each for these ones as well. No, I got that wrong. more than 5 slaves apiece, so slightly more expensive. An Ocelotl has the same number of attacks, the same strength, same sort of statistics, and more hit points, slightly lower protection, flies, but doesn't berserk. That's basically a trade-off. Now, does this mean, of these two, which would you prefer? I prefer the Ocelotl. I think the Ocelotl is the better unit. But the fact that we're comparing the Seirem to the Aussies, like, instantly means that they're in a good category. They're in a good category. They can hit really, really hard, and they'll take up less well. And Mictlan is normally more hamstrung than Berytos. The other advantage Ocelotls have is they can be summoned anywhere, as the evil demon hellcats they are, but Seirem are okay. If you're not blessing heavily, we can go back to Berytos here. Where was Berytos? There. Done. If you're not blessing, or even if you are, there's a possibility to instead go down the route of Shedim and Storm Demons. So, Shedim, so singular would be Shed, have the lightning range attacks, the 10 ammunition AoE 1 small area shock attack, which is armor negating shock damage plus a small AoE armor negating like area shock. This is the same attack, I'm pretty sure. 40. Yeah, okay. So this is the same attack as the Storm Demon. This is a national Storm Demon. What makes them different? Well, you get Summon Shedim in Wastes that gives you 28 for 3. So a bit more than 9 per 19, 27. Okay, so a little bit 9 1/3 slaves per shed at Blood 3 Air 1, or you can bind Storm Demons at Blood 2 Air 2. But at that point you're getting 1 Storm Demon for 10. So the trade-off here is Shedim have more hit points, are slightly cheaper, and are more efficiently summoned in that you get more per cast, so you're wasting fewer mage turns. The advantage of the Storm Demon is that they are ethereal, even though they have fewer hit points, and you might have Blood 2 Air 2 and not have Blood 3 Air 1, hypothetically. Both of these are perfectly serviceable for this, for throwing large amounts of armor negating, shocking, paralyzing damage at distance. Shedim are not sacred, unlike Seirem. So they're not going to benefit from any passive bless you have, but they and Storm Demons at Blood 4 and Blood 4, so again, pretty early in the game, give you the ability to throw lightning damage, reasonable distances with lots of ammunition, and also have that small AoE shock which can paralyze enemies. And again, there are lots of armies that might be really angry if you deploy large amounts of these guys relatively early in the game. Cool. Then we get on to Blood 6, and it's only Blood 6, okay? And Blood 6 lets you rouse the Brittain Melquarts from their slumbers. The Melquart is normally associated with Hinnom. It's this big blood super combatant-y sort of chassis. The difference is that the Brittain one, instead of being bought for 485 gold, is instead summoned for 99 blood slaves. That's okay. The ratio there is less important than the fact that they're cap-only slow to recruits, and you can hypothetically make these without using up your capital turns. And the spell is not super high pathed. Blood 3, Fire 2 is eminently doable for you. In many ways, these guys are really close to each other. They have the same sort of statistical lineup in almost every way. The difference is the Brittain one is Holy 3, and the Hinnom one is Holy 1. I also heard a lot of people saying that you do not need to pay upkeep on the summonable Melquarts. My testing suggests that that is wrong. Summoning Melquarts as EA Berytos yields a unit which still has several hundred gold per year upkeep. But it's a summonable Holy 3 super combatant that is also a Blood 3 that doesn't require cap turns to use. The random is the same, I believe, is it? No, it's not. Interesting. Okay, so the Hinnomite Melquart gets 2 levels in either fire, earth, or astral, whereas the Brittain one can get fire, air, or earth. Air here might be useful, as would be fire. Yeah, that's potentially useful. I would say all those paths are useful. Whereas actually getting 2 astral on a Hinnomite Melquart in some ways might be handy, but also leaves them vulnerable to magic duel. So in all ways, I would consider the Brittain Melquart to be the superior one. So once you get to Blood 6, you can start putting out a lot of these sacred super combatant type chassis with decent magic, and these can become your heavy thugs. They can either support armies, or they can do limited independent operations against enemies that don't know how to counter super combatants. At 99 Blood Slaves, this guy is a little bit more expensive than, say, a Vampire Lord. Far stronger, not immortal, but far, far stronger. And you can really put some pressure and some scare into people by summoning these guys up. So between summonable demon sacreds, summonable demon lightning throwers, and 2 different caster / super combatant summons, one of which can be done at Blood 6 for blood, and the other one comes at Conjuration 8, Berytos has a lot going for it in terms of its unit roster. Sorry, I know this has gone a while, and I was meant to jump out of the mod inspector, but the other thing I wanted to talk about with Berytos was its heroes, and I've got the non-worthy heroes at the top and 1 worthy hero at the bottom. Berytos also gets good heroes, and all of them are significant in their own way. The first is the Queen of the City. She is a Telkeen, the Queen of the City Telkeen, who does not cast Divine Malediction. She is meant to be a good influence on Theridos. She is basically placating the Melquarts who rule the city. She rules as the dual monarch. She's sort of tempering the worst instincts, although she's a bit of an enemy for the Brides-in-Waiting because of the power she has over the Melquart, who I believe is named here. Yeah, Baal Hamon. So yeah, which is great. She's a great charmer in her dog form, but she can also transform into this sort of titanic Telkeen human as well. So you get a nice little Telkeen. You also get some nature access, along with a whole bunch of other paths. And she also gets her Master Smith without dropping a nature path, which gives you Master Smith nature, which is handy. This is path access. This is a free super combatant. She's a true healer, also super handy. Sailing with a max size 4, so she can take armies over water. Makello is great. Dismata, I believe, is one of the senior Lion Queens. 1 second. Sorry about that. I had to step away for a moment. So I was talking about this death hero that they get. So death 3 is enough to jump you all the way up to all the death you could possibly want in terms of Conjuration, because it lets you get up to D4 with a staff and then go from there. So life is pretty good in that respect. Alright, back. Sorry, lots of interruption at the moment. That's all you really need, as long as you're also happy to go astral and pick yourself up a ring of sorcery to boost yourself as well. So staff will get you to 4, you need a ring to go to 5, 5 gets you the hat. If you even need to go that far, right? Because you can conjuring useful things prior to that point. Either way, this is the best, most reliable death access you get, as long as you have a decent amount of luck and can rely on the hero. Otherwise, you have to pursue other options. Good hero. Useful diversity hero. Baal Hamon is the king of the city. So this is the most powerful Melquart in Berytos, and the one responsible for turning them to the worship of the Melquarts in the first place. What you've got here is a Fire 3, Air 2, Blood 3, Holy 3, Sacred but old Melquart, who also has a whole bunch of extra weapons and a little bit extra armor. To this I say free Melquart. You know, nice paths, but also just like free Melquart. So that's kind of good. The multi-hero, this is from Worthy Heroes, which is I only include because Worthy Heroes is used in, I think, the majority of multiplayer games and all the ones that I have played in. This is a multi-hero Fire 1, Blood 1, Holy 3 Trampler with some pop kill. It's not particularly useful because it's a size 3 Trampler. It's only got 45 hit points, 14 prot, low defense skill. There's nothing about this that will make it survivable. Heat Aura doesn't make it particularly survivable. It's got no research ability. It's useful insofar as it's a free Holy 3. And if you're running around with a whole bunch of, like, Sacred Demons, for example, this might be the thing that you're using to bless them. If you don't have Melquarts, you can get your Holy 3s in the form of your Brazen Bulls relatively early. That's me finished in Mod Inspector. Let's jump back into the game for the final part of this guide. Okay, so how do you put all the parts together and play Berytos? And this is where I'm going to be much less prescriptive than I have been in my other guides, and that's for two reasons. The first is, I don't have as much experience with Berytos. This is a theory crafting guide. The second reason is, I think Berytos has lots and lots of choices. It has flexibility because it has good magic access, it has a serviceable troop lineup, it has a serviceable sacred with other summonable sacreds, it has sailing, which makes it more mobile, and it has the ability to trace income across sea zones, which also makes it all the more flexible in the way it chooses to expand. Here is how I would think about Berytos. I would decide what sort of broad strategy you want. I think in terms of thinking with Berytos, you can go a couple of ways. You can go, if you're not confident at expanding with Brittain troops, or you're concerned about being rushed, one thing you can do is you can take an Awake with an Incarnate Bless, expand with Colossi Warriors and with your Pretender, and then as soon as you get to Blood 3 and grab a Wasteland, start grabbing Sairin relatively early, so you can summon additional Berserking Sacreds with some sort of cool Bless, and you're good to go. It's a Bless strategy. You can go all the other way. You can say, I'm going Imprisoned, and I'm going Scales, and I'm going to grab... I think you need Production for Brittain troops. Magic and Luck are handy. Growth is handy. I'd probably go up to Heat 3, because I generally like going 2 positive temperature scales, because during the winter it'll drop down, you'll only be 1 off your scale, but you don't lose any income during the summer, because heat can't go above Heat 3, so I'm a big fan of that. Plus you have some fire magic, so I'd rather it be warm. And it also discourages Niflheim. Encourages Statist, discourages Niflheim. Niflheim's more dangerous, therefore I'm happy. I'm trying to think who else it discourages. Maybe Kaelin with their ice armor in the early age. So you could go full scales, and you could do troop-based expansion. Here it's a case of matching your expansion parties with the threat you're facing. So for example, Colossi do really well against masses of... very unlikely to take casualties against really weak-hitting units. So really crappy tribals, for example, they'll cut right through. These slingers over here, they'd mess right up. For things like barbarians, you don't want to send in units that are vulnerable to just being hit really hard and dying. For here, you have your javelin-wielding infantry that are capable of going in and taking those guys out with a fire closest order. You also have the ability during expansion to focus inland or along the coast, and remember that you can sail along the coast, so getting a couple of scouts to go along the coast and identify if there are hardies here, for example. Maybe you skip a province and start expanding down here. You can trace income, and then you can get a fort up there and basically turn it into a mutually supporting series of areas. If you're around a lake as Berytos, nation building becomes really easy, because fortresses can be far away from each other geographically, but within one move of each other, allowing you to defend yourself, because if an enemy doesn't have scouting on all your forts, they won't know what you can move on to crack their besieging force every time they move on. And Berytos gets decent forts, which is also super handy. So you have a couple of different mechanisms for expansion. A third mechanism might be you could go with a dormant or an imprisoned Incarnate Bless, and you could have that intended to support your Melquarts when they eventually come up, because of course Melquarts are sacred, and picking up something like a regen on them would of course make them really devastating. The problem is you can't make as much use of it on your starting sacreds as you could otherwise, and I think there's reasons to want some scales in Berytos, but you can also trash your scales, burn things down a little bit. In terms of the scale's usefulness, Order is probably the least useful in terms of your troops, because it tends to be resources more than rec points that will limit you, and gold. But Order can be really handy when you're blood hunting, because it helps bring unrest down passively, and if you can get a lot of Dominion Cantles in a province that you're blood hunting, it might help. So lots and lots of options. I'm not going to be too prescriptive there. Dormant, Imprisoned, Incarnate, Dormant, Imprisoned, Scales with stat blesses. I've tested both. I like Dormant and Prison's stat blessers myself because they make Colossi useful while also letting you build lots of conventional troops. You can expand without Sacreds, you can expand with an Awake. It's all good. Just give some thought as to whether or not you want to be a big user of the Sacred Seerim, or whether you're going more for Mazics and Storm Demons, in which case you don't need as much of a bless oriented for them, and you can think more about Melquarts in the late game. That's expansion. Then you need to decide on your research priorities, and I think this depends on your first fight. I think you need to pick up a tool if there's any risk of you being attacked early, of what are you going to use to win or discourage your first war. Berytos has a couple of options available to it. One is to go Conj 3 and maybe even Conj 5 for air elementals. You can do lesser air elementals with your really cheap coastal mages. You can do full-size air elementals with extra gems or with your air randoms, or if you also go for storm with your Stormcallers. And full-size air elementals will mess up a lot of things, right? You can go evocations if you want to go down the lightning bolt into storm and thunderstrike route. Stormcallers are capable of going that way. If you've gone with a bless that makes it useful and you're able to snag a wasteland, feel free to go to Blood 3 and grab a bunch of Seerim straight away, rather than waiting for Shadim. You've got options, right? Construction will give you utility because Sanguine Dowsing Rods are there, research boosters are there, and then eventually you're going to want the combination of construction, probably at least 4 and possibly 6, coupled with Blood 6, coupled with a little bit of Alt and Ench, or whatever you need in order to get the self-buff spells, in order to get your Melquarts and your super combatants online, because summoning Melquarts is a great part of Brittain strategy. Of course, they could also ignore them and just stick at Blood 4 and just do a bunch of Shedim or Storm Demons instead. What I'm saying is you have choices, and rather than saying one choice is necessarily better than the other, I'll say it depends a lot on what you're fighting. And that is what makes Berytos both strong and in a sense weak. It's weak in that A, it forces you to make hard decisions, and if you equivocate you may not go strong enough on what you need. And B, it means that because there's the temptation to switch to whatever you need to fight a certain enemy, if you're caught unexpectedly, it'll take you a couple of turns to adapt. If you're a nation that is one-dimensional and does one thing and one thing well, if you're Mictlan, then you know what you're going to do. You're going to take a Hellbless, you're going to make Jaguars, you're going to kill people with your Jaguars, then you're going to make Aussies, and you're going to kill people with your Aussies and your Jaguars. It's not that hard. If you're middle-aged Satis, you're going to research Enchantment 5, and you're going to skelly spam people while you put up Fel Vapors and kill them. Berytos is a little more nuanced. It's got summons of various sorts, it's got super combatants, it's got decent magic access, it's got a blood economy, and blood economies are hard to roll, but it's also the same reason I focus on the early and the middle game, because blood is your late game. It's hard to imagine a Berytos where the late game isn't blood, because your recruit non-coastals are blood hunters. They are reliable blood hunters in that they're at least blood 1, they're half upkeep, and they can be blood 2. They can be given Sanguine Dowsing Rods, you can do a decent amount of blood production. The Melquart does not require a wasteland and is a very good blood summon. You get a little bit of death access if you want to break in as well. You could go vampires if you want to. If you want to go blood 7, you want to get some immortals out, you can go them using your hero. The Queen of the Underworld, Dismarter, can get there. But I don't feel I need to talk much about Berytos' middle and late game because it's blood and it's good. It's blood. It's accessible blood plus unique summons, plus you have a good slew of elemental paths and a decent amount of mobility, and you're probably going to have scales and a great amount of money. You have an efficient mage core and army that can back up summonable super combatants like Life is Good. So I'm actually quite scared of Berytos on reflection. People have described it as weak. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm missing something. But in Berytos, I see a serviceable military lineup, a restricted coastal-only mage core that is capable of being an early game and middle game combat mage, a good capital-only caster, some really good summons, a serviceable blood economy, with the blood economy and the research monkeys both being able to be recruited in these interior forts here, so you can recruit the priests and the sages in interior forts along with your troops just fine. And a decent hero lineup, and as far as I can see, everything you need in order to be successful in a game. Even advanced forts in the early age. Extra handy. So between the sailing, the troops, the magic access, the super combatants, the blood access and economy, the diversity of options and the ability to deal with most threats that will come your way, I rate Berytos, and I'll be happy to try them in the future. I won't tell you necessarily how to play them, but I hope I've outlined the tools appropriately, and I really do look forward to seeing what they get up to in our Disciples game. Because if anything, our Disciples game is even better for Berytos because they have the added security of having another nation to support them or defend them early on, which allows them to go blood even sooner. And in that respect, there are but there are a few nations that are blood competitive with them in the early age. They are, if you have a recruitable blood 1 at human stats, then you're good. And a recruitable sacred blood 1/blood 2, excellent. So that's Berytos. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments. Thank you again for helping me reach the 1,000 subscriber count. And I'll be back with you again shortly. Cheers. Sorry, I'm back. Just for one addendum. The addendum is, I emphasized blood there, but don't forget that Berytos is still a capable researching nation with good elemental access. And you can combine blood with elemental access for some really brutal combinations. So think about your Fog Warriors, think about Mass Flight on the Seirem, if you have a Bless that's gone that way. Fog Warriors Seirem are just absolutely brutal, and if they fly on top of people and get Bloodlust, they'll hit super hard, they'll murder everyone really, really quickly. Also, don't rule out the ability of elemental magic to be your crutch in the middle game to hold you up while you wait for your blood to mass up and come online. Blood is a slow start kind of thing. So consider, as I said earlier, I think Flaming Arrows is a good example of something you can lean on early. Air Elementals, Evocations, the options are all there in the elemental paths because you have serviceable access to air, water, fire, you have communions, you can get the big buff spells down in decent quantities early enough in the game to make it matter. The other thing I'll say is do not forget, as a very late game option, with Telkeens you do have the ability to go play in the water. You will be coastal as Berytos, but you have water mages, which gives you the ability to go and find water gems. Now you can gear up Melquarts to go underwater, but you can also just send freaking Telkeens under there eventually in the late game when you go Conjuration 8. Usually I wouldn't go Conjuration 8 before going Blood 6 and getting the Melquarts, but there is a case to do so under niche conditions. Foul Vapor Autocast is interesting. It is a potential argument for taking some nature in the god, for example, and putting a poison resistance bless on your sacreds, but I don't think you can have enough sacreds for it to really matter. There are other options for chaffing up and taking full advantage of that foul vapors, or you can try and break into nature and protect your own army. There are options there is what I'm saying. The final thing is, what would I actually recommend with the god within the categories that I talked about? I just want to show you this. This is a 1,000 sub semi video, so I don't mind it going a little bit longer. Just 1 second, I want to show you one screen. This is Berytos God selection. You are spoilt for choice as Berytos. Some people focus much more on God build and selection than I do. I think that it's a much more of a personal choice in some respects, but you have the full range of selections. You have some cheap static ones if you want to go really cheap. Divine Glyphs, for example. Astral 2 Fire 1 at 110, or you can go the good old Golden Calf you always use for Ashdod, Earth 2 Blood 1, again 40, and you start at Dom 4, again for only 110. The Oracles and Fountains are a little more expensive. You've got statues, where was I looking? You've got the new Battles, which are relatively recent, which come in, which are slightly more expensive blocks. You've got some interesting ones that I wouldn't recommend. Not the God Block. The God Block's just another rock. Although if you want a really high Earth Bless, God Block gets you it. The Bronze Colossus is a horrifically expensive blunt resistant, slash resistant, pierce resistant, earth, air, protection, base protection 25. Importantly, mindless inanimate. God chassis, which is resistant to freaking everything. It's resistant to shock, it's resistant to fire, it's resistant to cold, it's resistant to poison. It can't be soul slain. It has earth magic. It's resistant to all damage sorts. It can go underwater. This thing is unstoppable. But like you're spending 370 design points on it. Do you want to give up 5? Do you want to give up 6 scales in order to upgrade from a Divine Glyph to a Bronze Colossus? And even more if you're going to take it away. I don't think so, but some people might think that that's funny if you just roll an unkillable, invulnerable pretender like straight to someone on year 1. That could be funny, just horrifically expensive. You have a full suite of Titans available to you. Including some of the more interesting ones. You've got the Invisible Assassin Titan of the Underworld for memeing. You've got the Forge Master if you want to go that route. Couple of useful Titans. You've got a really good range here. Archon if you want to play a chicken, who has an Inspiring Researcher too. Probably not worth it, horrifically expensive. You've got a decent range of monsters, including you'll note that the Telkine God King, who does include Reaper, and the Melquart are both available in the monster category, but only the Melquart has the discount. The Telkine does not have the 20-point discount for the nation. Good old Demi-Lich is here. I know some people swear by the Demi-Lich, and a range of small guys down here. So, most of my experimentation, I was playing around with Divine Glyphs and Golden Idols, doing stat blesses, but there's a whole bunch of flexibility up here if you want to go Imprison stats. You could also do the same thing with an Imprisoned Rainbow, or you can take something a little bit scarier. The reason I don't feel any great need to take a Titan, or unless you're going with an Awake monster, I wouldn't take a Titan as Berytos, because you can summon Melquarts, and Melquarts kind of do the job that Titans do. They're size 5, they have heaps of hit points and full slots. You can also summon Telkines, who again are available as a category here. So going up a little bit and getting a size 6 god for 1 unit, which I'm going to use unnecessary when I can pay 99 Blood Slaves to do the same thing. So Berytos is absolutely spoilt for god choice. Use this to characterize the magic that you want for your stat bless, for your access. Decide, do you want to break into nature? Do you want really high astral? Do you want at least astral 6 so you can make the Rings of Sorcery and increase your break points just that little bit more? I tend to like astral 6 on guards for that reason, but I'm very much a player who appreciates long-term access over short-term payoff unless I'm playing Nazca. So have a look through this list. Be prepared to play around with. I think Berytos is going to be a little bit forgiving with weird and zany ideas because the roster gives you options, and even if unless you get rushed down and killed relatively early, the nation's going to give you what you need in order to succeed. So be creative, enjoy yourselves. Hopefully you enjoy playing the nation if you get a chance, and hopefully I don't get completely rolled by these guys in our upcoming Disciples game. Cheers, and properly this time.